Welcome once again to Cinemaholics, where we talk about the biggest and best films coming to theaters and streaming online from the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm John Negroni, film editor for The Young Folks and film critic for other places like Awards Watch and The School. From Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he is a pop culture writer for Cinema Blend, and he's the co-creator of Cinemaholics. It's Will Ashton.
Hey there.
Will, we have a special guest.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, he's coming in all the way, beaming to us all the way from... I don't want to say Seattle, Washington. I think it's like, I don't know my Seattle area well, but it's like, you know, it's Washington State, big state. And he's a good friend of the show. It's Ryan Oliver.
Yes.
Hey, thanks for having me. And if you want to get technical, it's North Bend, aka Twin Peaks, where I'm broadcasting from.
I know some of those words. So Ryan, what have you, it's been a minute, you know, I think the last time we talked to you, it was on An Extra Milestone. We were talking about one of those movies, I think. What have you been up to? What's going on?
Oh, I've just been busy, mostly. I was just about to bring that up. Yeah, Extra Milestone. I think before that on the main Cinemaholics, it was, I want to say Pet Sematary and Shazam was the last time I was on. So yeah, it's been a minute.
Time ago.
I'm happy to be back, but yeah, no, just been keeping busy. You know, we've all had to make adjustments in our lives in the last couple of years. So just been basically doing that. So, but yeah, happy to be back on Cinemaholics to talk these films with you guys.
Hey, I'm a fan of your adjustments during these difficult times. Always love keeping up with your stuff. But for this week's show, we don't have a ton of movies to get to because, as some of you listeners know, especially if you follow us on Twitter and everything, TIFF is going on right now. Venice just finished. Telluride just finished. I mean, it's festival season over here in Cinemaholics land. I'm covering the Toronto Film Festival, although, you know, it's virtual, and I'll get into that a little bit later, but we only have two movies we're getting to for the main show this week. Well, what are they? I forgot.
Well, we're talking about James Wan's latest film, Malignant, and then...
Not Aquaman 2?
Not yet. Does that come out next year?
2023, I thought, but okay. I don't remember the slate. I don't remember the release date. I forgot. Right. I'm forgetting everything.
I know they're filming it now, but I didn't know when it was supposed to come out.
Maybe it is 2022, but it's a holiday release.
I have no idea. I know the last one was around Christmas, so I didn't know if that meant that we're getting it 2022.
Only we had access to the internet.
Sure. And then we're talking about a Netflix joint called Kate, starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Woody Harrelson.
I'm going to struggle to remember Kate. I saw it like a week or 2 weeks ago, and I'm like, okay, let's see. What are the things I remember about that movie? So we'll get to that. Hopefully you guys liked it more than I did.
Yeah, I just saw it not too long ago, and it is not keeping a long residence in my brain. I'll say that much going in.
I saw it yesterday, and I don't really remember much about it. So,
this is shaping up great. Okay, listeners, I bet you can't wait to listen to us struggle to remember this movie. Okay, well, we will get to Malignant first, and I'm very, very excited to talk about that movie for sure. Real quick, want to say you can find more episodes of Cinemaholics. All of our episodes, our whole archive is on cinemaholics.com. You'll also find written reviews there, other bonus content. As always, we want to share our email with you. Slide into our DMs, cinemaholics.podcast@gmail.com. Let us know what's on your mind, no matter what it is. Even if it's not about movies, tell us what's going on. We're worried about you. If you'd like to support this show, you could always go to Patreon. That's it's Patreon. You go to patreon.com, cinemaholics. You sign up for your favorite tier. It's easy. But you can also do it in a non-give us money way by going to Apple Podcasts and hitting that 5-star rating. But if you do that, you know, you could just do the 5-star rating, do it anonymous. That's super cool. But if you also want to do a review and you're like, okay, I want to get something for these 5 stars, I'm not just going to hand them to you. Well, you know, put the little feedback in there. Be like, hey, can you guys talk about this movie? Can you do this? Can you do that? Like, order us around. That's all we're asking. So you can do that on Apple Podcasts. Also, Google Play and Stitcher let you do that as well. I think it's just Google Podcasts now. I always say Google Play. But yeah, just do that. That'll be really fun. And of course, as always, on cinemaholics.com, in addition to all that, you know, all that reading material, all that listening material, you can find our merch page. And we keep telling you that new merch is coming. And then, you know, I'm always just like, yeah, I'm working on it. And then I don't work on it. And then you don't have it yet. But the classic stuff's still on there. The retro logo that's currently being rocked by, you know, quite a few people at this point. I've never seen anybody in the wild wear a Cinemaholics hoodie. Like the day that happens, well, I'm going to try to get a picture with them and send it to you because that's going to be like a moment. You know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah, that would be a watershed moment for us.
Yeah. Or at the very least, I would want to see somebody take a shot with a Cinemaholics shot glass. That would be,
yes.
At the bar.
Yeah. someone goes to take out of a normal shot glass, a bartender takes a drink from them, like, no. You want to be drinking in style. Proceeds to slide the little Cinemaholics shot glass in their way, fills it up extra high, even though it's a kind of small shot glass.
Well, it's flooding over. You can't even.
Yeah, continues to pour. It's already getting on the table. He's like, oh, you might want to stop doing that. He's so distracted by the logo on the shot glass, he just loses common
catching the twinkle
decency.
in his eye.
Yeah.
I bet that's how Christopher Nolan felt when he saw somebody with a Tenet glass at a bar. And it was just, the beer was like coming out of it and back into the bottle. So there you go. Before we talk about Kate and before we talk about Malignant, I wanted to bring up TIFF, Toronto Film Festival. I don't have too much to say. I was going to mention, I got to be careful about this because I don't want to sound bratty. I don't want to sound like I'm complaining, like I'm forgetting my roots. But TIFF is a hybrid film festival this year. And so for some of our listeners who are like, TIFF, who is that? No, not TIFF, not Tiffany. The Toronto International Film Festival. It's the biggest North American film festival of the year. This is where some of the biggest Oscar awards bait movies tend to come out. This is where Nomadland, premiered. This is where Green Book and Shape of Water, we tend to get Best Picture winners from this festival. It's pretty common. This one in Cannes are probably the two most common in general. And this is my first time ever covering TIFF. Will covered it last year, did a great job. Will, this year you have the year off. You're just, not doing the TIFF thing. But
yeah, by year off, that means I missed the deadline for applying, and I unfortunately won't be able to go. Though I've been hearing,
I didn't want to put you on blast.
Yeah, that's okay.
Not in front of Ryan.
Sure. But I will say, last year it went pretty much without a hitch. I don't remember having a lot of issues with the tech or any of the screener links, but I'm hearing that's unfortunately not the case this year for a lot of people.
Well, I wasn't even going to get into that. It was only the first day that it was like, oh, all the movies don't work. And it ended up working by nighttime, my time in the Pacific area. So I don't have a ton of complaint about there. Since then, it's worked totally fine. The big thing this year is it's a hybrid, right? So you can't watch all the movies, online, virtually as press. And, this is not just first world problems. This is first world problems to be like, I can't watch all the movies on my computer that's happening at TIFF. I don't want to be that guy, but it's lame. How am I supposed to cover this festival when all the biggest movies are only playing in Toronto? And on top of that, some of the virtual films, also big films coming out at the festival, I can't watch them either. They're virtual, but they say they're not available in your country. We don't care. You have to be in Canada or have a Canada IP address or something. And I'm not a hacker. I've watched a lot of YouTube videos. I know about NordVPN, but I'm not about that life. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to be in TIFF jail. And I'm in this situation where I can't watch Power of the Dog. I'm not going to be able to watch, Dear Evan Hansen, Dune, all these big TIFF titles, all Spencer. I can't watch any of the award stuff. Now, I complained about this to Will, and we were talking about it. Will's calming me down because I was bawling into his arms. But Will, we did kind of come to a place where hey, this is an opportunity to watch some lesser known films, not lesser films, right? Maybe there's some surprises in store. That's what I've been doing, and I'm gonna have a whole TIFF thing later this week, maybe, and tell you about some of these smaller movies I'm watching. And you know what? It's liberating. I'm having a good time.
I think that's part of the fun of going to a film festival virtual or otherwise, that you can be like, oh, I know nothing about this movie other than the description and the little photo that they put. Let's see if it's any good. And, when it's great, that's awesome. That doesn't happen all the time, I will admit, but it is cool when it does.
Yeah, it's frustrating for coverage for sure, but it is the best thing about a festival, like you guys already kind of said, is actually, getting to see something you probably wouldn't have otherwise, because in a couple weeks or to a month, you'll see Dear Evan Hansen and Dune and Spencer. Those movies are going to come out, but some of these other movies may not come out for another year or 2 or 4. So yeah, it's a good opportunity. I think that's a good way to put it.
I've been having a good time. You guys are right. I'm able to sit there. It's like Netflix. The way the virtual thing works, there's time limits, but every day has a new slate that expires a couple days from then, and it's easy. I just kind of look, and that's how I've been doing it. I haven't been reading a lot of the descriptions. I just see a movie title, and I see maybe a couple of actors I probably don't recognize, and then I might see who made it, and then I'm watching it. And I gotta say, the best one by far, I mean, it's not even close, is Petite Maman, which premiered, I believe, at Berlinale. But oof, that movie, the latest from Scalene Sciamma, her follow-up to Portrait of a Lady on Fire, it's fantastic. It's like I've been listening to the soundtrack on repeat. Like it's unbelievably good, and I'm kind of like, wait, is this going to be her big Oscar push, this movie? Because we didn't really get that with Portrait of a Lady on Fire. Neon kind of was like, no, we're just going to put Parasite up. But this movie, I don't think has like a major distributor, unless I'm totally missing something there. But great movie. I don't know. Ryan, have you seen Petite Maman yet?
I haven't, but I'm chomping at the bit to see it whenever I get the chance.
I hope you do. I feel like you would love it. I mean, Ryan, I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but I think Will might actually like it a little bit. Like he might actually.
What a concept.
He might have an emotional reaction to it. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, I remember it was getting a lot of really high notices. You said at Berlin Festival, right? And there was one before this one earlier.
Berlinale.
Yeah, Berlinale. Yeah, I mean, I forgot the title of it, but I just hadn't remembered that was getting a lot of good notices. And then when you mentioned you saw the film, it took me a minute to realize what movie you were referring to. But yeah, I mean, I don't know when it's supposed to come out widely, but I'm definitely looking forward to it, especially considering that I think it's only 74 minutes long.
Oh, yeah, 72.
72, there you go.
Made for you. It's such a quick watch, but I mean, it's definitely not one of those movies where you're like, oh, that's why it's short. No. This is like, oh, this is bliss in terms of its length.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's all I'm going to say about TIFF for now. And I don't want to get into anything. I haven't seen that many films yet. I think the real like meat of the festival is about to heat up. So after this show, I'm going to, put my feet to the fire and get to watching more things. But I did have a chance to see the Voyeurs, that new Amazon Prime thing. I'm the only one here who watched the Voyeurs, but I did want to ask, Ryan, like, what's the deal? I thought you liked Sydney Sweeney. I thought you were a big fan. Are you planning on checking this movie out at some point? The Voyeurs on Amazon Prime?
I'm going to be straight with you, John. Until pre-show here, this is the first I've even heard of this movie. So the answer is probably no.
It's kind of under the... I don't think Amazon wants people to even know this just came out. I haven't seen anything for it. The only reason we knew it was because we were looking at like the slate, Will and I, last week, and it was like, oh, what's this movie? Although, Will, had you already heard of the Voyeurs? Maybe I'm misremembering that.
Yeah, no, I was familiar with it. Only that it was a new Sydney Sweeney film, but
not made by her, made by Michael Mohan, but
right,
with her in it.
With her in it, yeah,
and Justice Smith.
Mm-hmm. Detective Pikachu's best friend.
Yeah, his
close
partner,
buddy. Yes,
Will.
His
trainer.
His family.
Yeah, the Voyeurs is basically like Rear Window, but for like pornography, basically, kind of. I'm not sure how to describe it. I'm not going to get into much detail, but I did see it, and I don't have like a binary see it or don't see it kind of thing. I will just say this movie kind of sucked me in a bit. It's one of those movies where it had me in the first half, not going to lie. I was kind of like, well, this is kind of like a slick presentation here. Like, I'm liking the cinematography. I'm liking the production design. It takes place in Montreal. I knew it was French, and Will, we were talking about this before we started the show, and Will was like, oh, maybe it was in Toronto. Will, you were close. It was in Montreal. It was Canada. And, fitting for this release because, the Toronto Film Festival right now, this is not TIFF. But yeah, it's on Amazon Prime right now. It's being billed as an erotic thriller, and that's pretty much what it is. But I didn't get anything out of it like thematically at all. But I kind of was like into its like smutty charms, if that makes any sense. And Sydney Sweeney is just like, she's just a really good actress. Like, she's kind of, outdoing Justice Smith quite a bit here, although they're a good team. Ben Hardy is kind of like this sort of, what's the word? Like Neo Peeping Tom kind of character. For fans of that 1960 film, it's worth a watch, actually. I mean, if you're curious about it, I'd actually maybe give it a shot. I think it has a pretty gonzo last act. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, but that's all I'll say about The Voyeurs. One of those movies you don't want to give too much away, and I think the premise kind of speaks for itself. So it's on Amazon Prime Video right now, it's way better than Cinderella. I will put it that way. I don't think it was shot on film, but it definitely has like a shot on film aesthetic. So that's for you, Will. Just for you.
Right on. I was trying to remember. There's another movie that had kind of a Rear Window vibe this year, and I remembered it was The Woman in the Window.
Yeah.
So
even had window in the title. Shameless.
Sure. There you go.
I'll have to check the Voyeurs out. That sounds at least interesting, and you don't get an erotic thriller on a certain scale really anymore, it seems like. So I might have to check that out.
Yeah, it's not the smallest budget. I'm actually kind of impressed the effort they put into it. I'm a little disappointed it's being it's getting, I think, panned right now by critics. Not panned. It's mixed to slightly negative. I think the last time I saw the Rotten Tomatoes, it was lower end. It was like right below like 50. It's like in the 40s. So not a guarantee that you will like it, but I kind of did. So that's all I can say. All right, let's talk about our first big movie of the week, though. And here's a movie that I want everybody to watch. I'm just kidding. I don't want everybody to watch this. I think some people will get upset with me if they watch this because I recommended it. But let's talk about Malignant.
The body of Dr. Florence Weaver was found brutally murdered in her home this morning.
Did you know her? No, but I saw her die. I'm seeing things. I'm seeing murders as they're happening.
Hello?
He says his name is Gabriel. I think he's someone from my past.
Happy birthday.
Whatever happened to you before you joined our family hurt you in a way that I can't even imagine.
Stop saying that.
Maddie, who are you talking to?
Gabriel.
Is he your imaginary friend? Imaginary?
He's the devil.
Well, you already mentioned that Malignant was directed by James Wan. And I mean, it's James Wan. We saw Aquaman from this guy, his big superhero movie. But tell us, what are his horror bona fides are, pretty well known at this point, right?
Yeah, well, he directed the first Saw. Did he co-write the first Saw as well?
I believe so, with Lee Winnell.
Yeah, I was going to say. But yeah, he is he got his big break from the first Saw film, kind of struggled to find his footing from there with like Dead Silence and the Kevin Bacon one. Became prominent once more with the first and second Insidious film. Then he did the Conjuring film, first two Conjuring films, which really elevated him to be one of our premier horror directors. Because, I mean, people were taking stock of him, but having him, created one of the lasting early 20th or 21st century horror movies franchises. Then another pretty well acclaimed one. Then now, Warner Brothers like horror movie darling at this point. It gave him a little bit of clout, and then especially going into studio director mode with Furious 7 and then Aquaman, it seemed like he was a proven success or a proven quantity at that point, which allowed him to have the carte blanche to basically get his blank check and make Malignant, which is he did the movies for them, for Warner Brothers, and it's like, now this is my little nugget, my little thing I can kind of do on my own before I go make Aquaman 2. And I give him props because I don't think he fully ran with it, but by the end you can clearly tell that he got away with things I think a lot of other filmmakers would not be allowed to get away with that budget and scale, which definitely makes me giddy, I have to admit.
This guy, I was thinking about this during Malignant. We'll set it up, of course. We'll tell you all about it. But there's a section of this film where I was like, this is why he wanted to make this movie. And he had an idea, I'm sure, of like, I could imagine if I could interview him, I would want to press him on this and be like, did you literally just have one scene in mind and you just built an entire movie around it? Like, that's what it feels like. And I'm super happy for the guy getting his blank check movie, and that it's getting like an overnight cult status, because it's not doing well at the box office, but
yeah,
more people have talked about Malignant in my feeds. I don't know about your timelines. More people have talked about Malignant than any other movie this past week. I mean, Shang-Chi got a lot of conversation, but past few days, people are like, Shang who?
Yeah, because Wasn't screened for critics, I don't think, right? I only saw the reviews come out.
Nope.
I think
And the
that
embargo
Friday.
was like right before Friday. Yeah.
Yeah,
Not much
that's what I
marketing.
found.
Screened very late. Like they sent links out Thursday, and then as far as physical screenings, that was only in New York and LA.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So a lot of us were just kind of like, we'll watch it at midnight with everybody. Yay. And then we watched Malignant. I mean, I watched it Friday, right? And I was just planning on seeing it because I'm like, oh yeah, it's on HBO Max. I was like, I might as well. But then I started getting the hype because people were like, hey, you don't understand. Like this isn't, you know, just another like Conjuring universe kind of throwaway sort of thing. Because that's the other thing. He's produced a lot of those movies. He produced like The Nun and some of the Insidious stuff after the first one. The guy hasn't written a film since The Conjuring 2. He didn't write this one. He did, but you know, he's behind the story and all. He has a story credit. He tends to have story credits on a bunch of these. Yeah.
Yeah, I think he came up with a story with his wife, who also is in the movie for a brief role, Ingrid Bisu.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was in Tony Erdmann. That's the main thing I remember her from.
Tony Erdmann, which it was nominated for the Palme d'Or, but it didn't win, did it?
Yes, I believe that's correct. Or won like a second or third tier prize, like a grand jury thing or something, I think. I don't remember exactly, though. It was a big to-do, though, at the year it came out at cons.
Let me set this thing up because I want to start with Ryan and I want to get his 2.5 cents on Malignant. But the setup of this movie is that we follow this young woman played by Annabelle Wallis, right? And she's just kind of she's doing her thing. She's pregnant. She has a husband who you're not going to like for sure. And a couple spooky things start happening where there's something like haunting them in this house. And as you can imagine, I even saw somebody joking about how like the house in there feels like every house in a James Wan movie, like just like the production design of it. But that said, some creepy stuff starts happening and it all seems to center around her. You know, there's some of these murders that are happening in the area and she feels like she is like dreaming through them or something. It's very, very unclear what's going on because she's like, wait, who is this person? And she starts to wonder if it's her imaginary friend from when she was a child. So that's kind of the setup for Malignant, all I want to get into. But Ryan, what do you think of this movie? I mean, talk to you about like, did you have any expectations for this one going in? Were you already like had you already seen all the hype, right? Or did you kind of watch this being like, oh, whatever?
Well, so I got a little lucky in that I too watched it Friday, but I was coming off of 5 pretty insane weeks at my day job, and my manager's like, "Hey, like if you don't really have anything to do Friday, don't." So I watched this at like 8:30 in the morning, pretty much the second after we took my son to Montessori. Yeah, exactly.
Will doesn't understand the pleasures, the privilege of watching a horror movie at before dawn. He seems to think that it's lame and not the right way to watch horror movies. It's very gatekeeper.
I never said you can't watch a horror movie during the day. I just don't understand why you'd want to watch a horror movie during the day, but I understand that whatever, different strokes for different folks.
Yeah. I think your exact words were you're doing it wrong. You're embarrassing yourself.
Yes, maybe so.
Well, sometimes you got to do what you got to do. And when you're strapped for time, hey, if you got that window, you got to take it, right? So I watched it before the hype train. And I guess I'll frame it a little bit going into the movie. I'm a pretty big fan of James Wan's overall. I mean, Will laid it out perfectly, his filmography. The only movies of his I haven't seen are his first film, Stygiant, hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, and the second Insidious movie. But I've pretty much been in the bag for a lot of things that he's done. And I was following this movie because he, was kept under wraps what the movie was about. All I knew about it was that he had mentioned prior to the lead up that it was going to be heavily influenced by Giallo. Which for anyone who's listening isn't familiar, that's like the Italian slasher movies. The pulp paperback novels with the yellow spine usually involved around a black glove killer and a detective or somebody coming into a detective role to figure out what is happening. That got me very excited. When I saw the trailer for this movie, and I don't usually watch trailers, but I think it played in a theater in front of something that I went to see. And it kind of deflated me a bit because it looked like just another Conjuring universe movie and not one like he directed either, like kind of like one of those offshoot ones, which I will say the look of this movie kind of feels that way, which we'll get into as we go along. Like my one real gripe about the movie. But after watching it, I wouldn't say it's fully inspired by like that type of giallo, but this quickly becomes very heavily influenced by Italian horror in general. It goes off the rails. The color palette is bathed in red. Blade, there's a lot of blade or knife related deaths in the movie. There is a black gloved killer, which, you know, we'll kind of tiptoe around some of that stuff. And it is really gnarly, really bloody. It relies a lot on dream logic. It kind of asks you to go off the rails along with the movie. So more than probably being conventionally good, I'd say the movie is like, it's insane for sure. And it kind of asks not a lot of you, but it asks you to kind of go along with it. It's a wavelength, basically, I would say. You're going to either be on it or not, which is kind of where John came from at the start of this, saying like, it's probably going to piss a lot of people off if you're not on this particular wavelength. But before I kick it back to you guys, John, I have to say, I actually thought of you a bit watching this movie because, as I already mentioned at the top, the last time I guested on the show, we talked Pet Sematary. And I remember, you know, almost over 2 years ago now, you saying during that review, and I quote, "I'm so sick about horror movies about grief." And when this movie starts, it sure seems like that's kind of the route it's going. But it completely subverts that without any sort of pretension whatsoever as the movie proceeds. And so, yeah, I definitely thought of you by the end of this movie. But yeah, suffice to say, I enjoyed the hell out of this movie. I don't want to give anything away. I think you should go in as cold as possible. It is a bit, I wouldn't say unfortunate, but like the hype could, I feel, overhype it for some people. But I would say just go in with an open mind. And I think if you can tune into this movie's wavelength, I think you will really, really enjoy it.
See, here's the problem, Ryan, because, you know, first of all, yes, it is the anti-horror movie about grief cliche. Like, this movie couldn't be less about that. It's just so great. It's just like, to me at least, I look at this movie and I'm like, man, James Wan looked at Luca Guadagnino's remake of Suspiria and was like, that's a little bit too restrained, you know? But that's the thing. To get to this movie's big punchline, you have to sit through a generic kind of Conjuring spin-off kind of movie, you know? Like this kind of just sort of like, oh, it's like a faint sort of replica of, you know, Giallo movies. Like it's not super great. I mean, it's a little hard-boiled, I guess, but I was just kind of like, I don't care that much. I don't really love this character, but it keeps you going because some of the elements of it are pretty spooky and interesting. There's like the mystery. You're kind of like, hey, this mystery seems kind of obvious, but there's got to be more to it, right? There's got to be like an angle that we're missing, and you know, clearly the movie turns us around. But Will, what about you? I mean, are you kind of on that? Were you on this movie's wavelength? You know, how was your experience with this? Because you came in after a lot of the hype, right? Because you saw this yesterday.
A little bit. Yeah, I saw it yesterday. I think, more eager to see it than some leading up to its release because, like Ryan was saying, I was hearing that it was a Giallo riff, I guess, or like his take. I think the exact quote that James Wan had is that like, it's Giallo influence, but it's like my take on Giallo. Like he was basically saying that like he was inspired by like Phenomena and Trembre and a couple other Dario Argento films, but it wasn't going to be like Suspiria or like Deep Red or something like that. It was going to be kind of like his take on it, which
I think he also mentioned Cronenberg and Hooper.
Sure. Well, any body horror is going to be indebted to Cronenberg, I have to imagine. But yeah, I mean, I was just excited to see on a like Hollywood budget a Giallo film for like the modern day. And then like Ryan, I saw the trailer I think before The Night House or something, and I was just kind of taken aback in a bad way because I was just like, oh, this looks like, you know, like another kind of haunted house paranormal film from James Wan. But like I knew at the end of the trailer they had like that kind of like guitar riff, and it kind of felt like a tease of like, hey, we can't really say what this is, but like it is going to be more like this. So like, you know, just like kind of like on the DL, like let know that that's what it's going to be. And I kind of similar to you, I felt like watching the movie for like the first I'll say like 75 minutes. I was kind of like, I wasn't against it. I think it moves well. I think it has like kind of like high energy to it, and it has some decent performances and solid cinematography and select shots throughout. But I was kind of just like, been here, done that. It doesn't seem, I don't really get what James Wan really wanted to do with this passion project. I was a little underwhelmed for the first half or so, a little over the first half. And then I feel like you said, the joke kind of comes in. And that's the point where like my audience I saw it with, I think we had like kind of like a flipped reaction where like they were kind of with it for like the spooky paranormal stuff, and I was kind of ho-hum whatever. And then when it became the more directly giallo reference like bloodbath part, I was like perking up in my seat like, oh yeah, here we go. This is where now we're talking. And I think that was like, oh no, that's dumb. I don't want that. And I think that's where you're kind of suggesting earlier, is that like that point, that turning point is going to be so crucial for how people accept the film. It's sort of like Orphan from a few years ago, where it's just like, if you hear the twist and you're like cackling and you're just like, okay, yeah, sure, let's do this, you're going to be with it. If you're like, oh no, that took away from the suspense, I'm not down with that, then you're going to be turned it back. But I think I was, my hopes of the film was that it was going to be James Wan's like Drag Me to Hell, like his like kooky balls out horror movie between superhero movies, or blockbusters at least. And I was like hoping that would be a case. I think it's somewhat the case, but I do think it is kind of dragged down by the plotting and how like James Wan ultimately favors set pieces, I think, more than characters. Ultimately, that's been the case throughout most of his films, even his good ones. And I don't think it's an exception here. I do kind of wish there was a little bit more to get invested in the first half, but I also respect that James Wan, like I think throughout the film it's deliberate, like how the dialogue is like cheekily kind of wonky, and like the performances kind of get more and more heightened as they go along. Those seem to be other nods to giallo that I think other people aren't going to really pick up on or be kind of turned off against. But I ultimately, I mean, I do get the like 80s sleaze vibe throughout this, and I don't think it quite reaches those heights just because like the digital filmography I don't think is quite great. I think that takes away from some of the charm of some of the prosthetics that we've seen later in the film. But ultimately, I think more often than not, I walked out of the film having a pretty good time. I don't love it as much as some people do, but I can definitely see the appeal. And when it does go, bug nut insane, I think that's when it's at its most enjoyable.
I'm glad you brought up Orphan, because that's, in addition to giallo, that's another thing that I see people online comparing it to, which is like the late 90s, early 2000s, or I guess late 2000s in Orphan's case, Dark Castle films, movies like the House of Wax remake and Orphan. I feel like 13 Ghosts, I think, is one of them as well. People are comparing them to that, and I do think it has a little bit of that feel to it. And then you brought it up, and I wanted to piggyback off what you said about the cinematography, because that was a big sticking point on this movie for me. I usually don't like to call out crew or anything like that, but the DP on this film, Michael Burgess, who's the son of Don Burgess, who shot Wan's last two movies, The Conjuring 2 and Aquaman. He's usually Robert Zemeckis' DP, but it's his son, and he shot actually the last three Conjuring universe movies, which would be Annabelle Comes Home, Curse of La Llorona, and The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. And it just has this like really cheap digital look to it that I wish they went for some other like smaller movies, smaller recent movies that have tried to emulate that giallo feel from the 70s. I think specifically Knife Plus Heart is one of them. Piercing would be another. I kind of wish they would have went for that look. And that's really, for me, my only real big sticking point with the movie is it does look kind of cheap and fakey from time to time, when it should have been like this big sort of Technicolor canvas.
I want to give Michael Burgess props though on the lighting, because I think, say what you want about the digital aesthetic, like to me it felt like a video game. So like it kind of worked for me. Like I kind of mentioned in my little tweet review of it, this movie is basically like a PS1 1998 horror video game brought to life in like the best way possible, and in some of the worst ways possible. But I actually think what Burgess was able to do with the lighting on this and just sort of like hiding certain aspects of the twist using cinematography I was actually really impressed by that.
Yeah, I would vouch for that portion of it for sure. Especially because I actually rewatched it last night. I watched it Friday, and then I rewatched it last night in anticipation of this show. And watching it with knowing where it's going to ultimately go, I was able to pick up on those subtleties a bit more. I mean, it's a very unsubtle movie narratively, for sure, but there are a lot of visual subtleties that I think really, really work in its favor. And I gotta say, though, I know you guys are pretty down on the first 2/3 of the movie, and I completely understand. But I think there's a couple, like, heart monitor blips that do happen throughout this first part of the movie. I think specifically the cold open of the film.
I would agree, yeah.
Sort of like emulate, I feel like, the tone to come. And it does happen. I mean, there's like, we'll have to get into the score of the movie as well, which is kind of all over the place like the movie, which I appreciate. Like, there'll be like kind of classical, almost like Prague, Goblin-esque sounding score, but then there'll be like a remix of Where Is My Mind by the Pixies worked into it. There was also, correct me if I'm wrong, I might be crazy, there was one bit of score that I swear played that like chant that you hear at like an NBA game, that like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I was like, what is happening right now? And I, like, little touches like that were able to kind of get me through that first 2/3, but I would at least largely agree that some of the character stuff, not particularly great. But at the same time, it's like you can almost forgive it a smidge because the movies he's trying to emulate, like Phenomena, which you brought up, Will. I'd also throw in The Sect is another movie. It's Mikel Sovolai. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's like a Dario Argento protege. It like reminded me of that as well. But anyway, I digress.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely enjoyed the score, and I was a little taken aback by the lifting from Where's My Mind. I kept wondering if like they knew that they were doing that, Pixies, I mean, or if they had just kind of like made a change enough to where it doesn't quite inspire a lawsuit. But I mean, it's kind of hard not to think about that song. Obviously, they're definitely evoking it. But yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I'm kind of torn because like I appreciate the like flashes of like red and the hyper colorized moments, but I also feel like a lot of scenes, especially in the middle, feel kind of washed out and a little drab visually in a way, especially the scenes that primarily take place at night. It just felt like there was opportunities for a little bit more pulp or a little bit more visual style, and it seemed like in the middle it was less inspired than like the opening and the closing. So it wasn't enough to like take me out of the movie completely, but I did kind of find myself less engaged with those segments compared to the opening and obviously the closing.
I'll mention the score too. So this is Joseph Bishara, he's done the score for a lot of James Wan movies, a lot of Conjuring verse movies. He did like Insidious. I think the first two Insidious. He did Dark Skies, the Scott Stewart film, and he did he did a VHS in addition to Annabelle and a whole bunch of stuff. And one thing that I like about Joseph Bishara too is that he's been in a lot of these movies as like a demon or something. Like they tend to get him to like dress up and do all kinds of fun stuff like that. I looked for his name in the credits of this. I didn't see, I could be wrong, but I don't think he plays any like sort of spooky like thing in this movie, but that's okay. He's done a lot of other stuff. But yeah, I agree with the take there about the music. I think what's weird about this movie is also kind of what's so unique about it. I mean, it really does feel like two very distinct horror styles trying to sort of like coexist. And I think when they're trying to coexist is when the movie for me is like just a bit harder to accept, at least on the first viewing. I wonder if the second viewing, to what you're saying, Ryan, I'm going to be able to sort of like feel this movie out a bit easier, because when, I guess for me, it was frustrating to be like, is this really like a campy B movie? Is this really like Dark Castle? Or is this, another Conjuring kind of thing? Is this sort of like, what is that Stranger Things font trying to tell me? And yeah, it's like those two things don't go together very seamlessly, at least for me on first viewing. But yeah, I mean, once it really goes full in, there's a moment in this movie. I think somebody on Twitter called it the holding cell that time forgot. This scene here, which I won't say anything about it in detail, where I think this is like the turning point of the movie, or it's part of the turning point. Like there's like a sequence of scenes, it's like a building tension to like what's going on, and there's a reveal right then and there that is just I cannot believe, kind of to what you were saying, Will, that this movie had a $40 million budget. like a movie like this, which in the 80s probably would have had like a $2 million budget. 12 people might have seen it at a rental store. Like it's one of those movies where, you know, you kind of have to go to the clerk and be like, all right, but can you give me like the good stuff here? Can you give me that, like the kind of movie that we saw like being censored and censor, you know what I mean? And the fact that it's coming out, it's on HBO Max, you know, it's in theaters, like it's on a ton of screens. It's tanking at the box office, I think, for a very specific reason. But yeah, I'm just sort of, I'm in awe. I'm in awe that this movie happened.
Yeah, no, I mean, I totally agree. I think that's like the joy of it, right? Is that he got away with it basically because he had the studio clout and he's like, okay, give me this one and then I'll do your Aquaman movie. I mean, not that he didn't want to do Aquaman 2. I'm sure he did, but it was just like, let me just kind of have my little moment.
Yeah, he likes money.
Yeah, and I appreciate that like Warner Brothers seems to be kind of embarrassed by it and just like, oh, you know, James just kind of wanted to do his own thing. Here you go. Sorry about that. And critics are, for the most part, kind of be like, are you kidding? Like, this is what we wanted from you guys. But of course, the audience response seems to suggest that we're probably not, this is going to be more the exception than the norm for what they're going to put out. We'll probably get more sort of listless Conjuring sequels and spin-offs at this point, which, you know, is the way it is, I guess. But I did appreciate, yeah, it did feel like he kind of got away with something here. And then I also really did appreciate the it looked like prosthetics for the most part towards the end. I don't know for sure if it was prosthetics or like yeah, which I also really appreciate that, you know, he did that. And then there's also like some good contortionist work without saying too much as well that I really appreciate. Yeah, I mean, that little moment is, I think, kind of like the gem here. And I think the rest of it's fine enough to like warrant that. But yeah, I agree with you, as you were saying before, that like if that's the point where you're just like, no bueno, I'm not about this, and you're not going to have a good time for this movie. But if that's the point where you're like, oh, hell yeah, let's do this, then you're the ideal audience here.
And it's such a smart move to just go that like insane with this, because I want to say maybe it was John who brought it up, because again, we're not going to spoil anything, but I think it's safe to say the what of the reveal is really obvious from the start, and you're like, oh, well, that's like deflating. I know exactly where this is going, but the how, there's no way you're going to figure that out at all. And so I think it's a smart move for them. Just like, yep, gloves are off. We're going this route now. And, you know, I do agree to Will's point.
I think you mean gloves are on.
Oh,
Ryan.
Yes. I think that's actually a fair point. But I was going to piggyback off what you said, Will, in that I think this is going to be the exception to the rule. But it is exciting, at least, that it exists. We talked recently on my podcast, The Good, the Bad, the What. We talked about alien assimilation films recently, and we talked about Slither, James Gunn's second movie. And both me and my co-hosts are big fans of that movie, but we had mentioned, and we of course brought up The Suicide Squad, and we're like, yeah, it's fun and all, but like I wish James Gunn, would use his clout to make like Slither or Super on a $50 million budget based on like having made the Guardians movies and
make a Slithering.
Yeah,
Slithering, directed by James Gunn.
Exactly.
2022.
And so what I'm saying is that we got with James Wan basically did that, was like, okay, I made Aquaman, I made $1 billion. I've directed / produced 9 Conjuring movies that have grossed $2 billion combined. I'm going to take my blank check before I make the Aquaman sequel. And he did it. He made the movie that we want these filmmakers to hopefully use their clout from comic book movies to make. And so it's like, for better or worse, we got it. But I think it's for the better. Personally, I had a blast.
James Wan, more like James Want.
I mean, the only thing I'll push back on is I think if you ask James Gunn about that, he would probably say Brightburn is that movie for him, however you feel about that film. But I guess that's sort of his like,
oh yeah,
blank check. Forgot about Brightburn. Yeah, but I would much prefer if he just had a chance to make a balls out weird, goofy horror comedy movie again. But I don't know, maybe someday, who knows.
Maybe. But you already brought up Drag Me to Hell, and I feel like that's actually probably, I wouldn't say this movie is as good as that, but I think that's a good comparison point for people going into this movie, because I remember similarly that movie takes a turn that people, it's like you're really with it or you're not. But that movie is Sam Raimi to a T, just as this is, you know, James Wan to a T. So I think that That's probably one of the best, closest approximations of this movie.
Yeah, I guess for me, the big difference there is like Drag Me to Hell, like the whole movie is like awesome. Like it's the whole way through. Whereas this one, you kind of have to eat your vegetables with this movie a bit. Drag Me to Hell, there are no vegetables. It's all steak, my opinion at least.
Oh, that's actually a fair analogy.
But yeah, so Ryan, we like to play a little game these days on the show. You know, it's a little quiz show. You know, it's a guess the Rotten Tomatoes score. Now, you might have already seen the Rotten Tomatoes score, so it could help you. I don't know. The rule is don't cheat. So I know it's a tough rule to follow, but all you have to do is we're just going to see who can guess the Rotten Tomatoes score the closest. And we're not just doing the Rotten Tomatoes score, but we'll get to that. We'll start with you, Will, because you know the rules, the tricks of the game. So. Yes. You know, it's possible Ryan might have seen the score and is like, I got this in the bag, but I'm not going to mention that I saw the score. I'm going to look super smart. And so everyone listening right now is going to follow my podcast on Twitter. So, you know, we want to help Ryan out with his marketing, Will Ashton. So you're going to have to go first. So, Will.
Yeah.
What do you think? Rotten Tomatoes, what are we doing?
I'm going to go high. I'm going to say 74%.
All right. So 74% guess from Will Ashton. Ryan Oliver. This is it. This is your chance to make an impression.
Is this like Price is Right rules, like the closest without going over?
No,
can I bet $1?
Closest.
Okay. No, I if I recall, because I did see it the other day. Of course, that given the way that we mentioned the rollout, critics have been slowly seeing it, so it could have gone up or down. But I'm going to go one up. I'm going to say it's 75.
Will Ashton, how does it feel to be crushed in battle? Because guess what the score is? It's 75.
75, all right.
And
that was close.
75%. You were not close enough. Yeah. 75% out of 73 reviews. Ryan, good, well done. Will doesn't lose very often. And
well, I did see it on Friday. I'm just shocked that I'm shocked it held, to be honest. I'm shocked that it didn't like get it and then like sink like a stone to like the low 60s. So I just went with my gut there.
Now we're going to get to the harder one, right? Now because we know how film critics operate. Like they're pretty predictable, but audience scores, we hardly get those right. Will Ashton, what do you think this audience score is on Rotten Tomatoes?
I'm going to go low because just based on my audience response to the film and how I feel other mainstream audiences are going to feel, I'm going to say 54%.
54% from Will. He's going the anecdotal approach. What say you, Ryan Oliver?
I'm going to say, yeah, that's tough, actually. I know it got a C cinema score, and that's pretty par for the course for a horror movie.
You gave it away. We were going to do cinema score last.
I'm so sorry. I don't know if I was supposed to swear. Oh, God. Okay. I'm going to say, though, I'm going to go a bit lower. I'm going to say it's 45.
Oh, you went too low. Will, you won that round. It's 51%.
Okay.
Yeah, 51%, 100 plus verified ratings on Rotten Tomatoes.
Yeah, it's a divisive film for audiences, but I mean, what did you expect? I guess James Wan, like we said, went out. He was just like, I'm just going to do my thing. If you like it, cool. If not, whatever. I'll see you with Aquaman 2.
Yeah, there's the door. Yeah. All right. So since we can't do, cinema score is a C.
I'm sorry.
Since we can't do that, Ryan, your punishment is you have to try to recite the critics' consensus word for word. No, I'm just joking. You have to do that. But all right, that is Malignant. It's available to stream right now on HBO Max and see it in theaters. It is just 111 minutes long. We do have one more film to talk about. And this one also is available to watch on a streaming service. And that streaming service is Netflix. This movie is called Kate. And Kate is an action revenge thriller. It was directed by Cedric Nicholas Troyan and written by Umair Alim. This one stars Mary Elizabeth Winstead as an assassin in Tokyo. And, she's ready to get out of the game. She's been an assassin since she was a kid. She's ready to retire. Who can blame her, right? She works for Woody Harrelson's character. I think his name in movies like V or something. It's pretty lame. But, he's kind of along for the ride. It's her last job. Everything's going fine. She guesses, but then something traumatic happens, and then something even worse happens. And now she's in a situation where she only has 24 hours to figure out who just poisoned her. And if she's successful, she might be able to get her revenge. If she's not, well, what are you going to do? And she kind of goes after these crime bosses, the Yakuza, I think they're Yakuza or Triad, who are, basically they're trying to kill her. They're trying to get her, they're trying to take her down. Over the course of the movie, though, she strikes up a bond with the daughter of one of these mob bosses, one of the ones that she assassinated, in fact. And the two of them kind of team up, sort of take down this organization bit by bit. So the movie, like I said, just hit Netflix. There was some, anticipation for it. And I have to say, I hadn't really heard much about the movie. I mean, I think David Leitch was like producing the film. First time I had heard of it. And, there's some chatter about the movie. Some people being like, hey, this is Mary Elizabeth Winstead kind of coming out to play here. She's kind of like looking Atomic Blonde in the eye, kind of be like, maybe this is going to be like a fun new sort of John Wick kind of inspired action movie with some really good action scenes and some really good characters, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The movie just came out though, and we kind of already mentioned, we kind of gave away the game here that just doesn't seem a lot of us are that into it. I mean, I've forgotten most of it. I was struggling through the synopsis, to be totally honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, Will, you were excited about this one though, right?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, at least before the reviews came out, or at least before you saw it. Because, I mean, just based on the synopsis, it sounded like, all right, here's Mary Elizabeth Winstead's big action movie. It's Crank by way of John Wick. And it's her going after the Yakuza. It's like, all right, that sounds like a totally fun thing that I would like. But it's kind of in the same camp as Sweet Girl from a couple weeks ago, where it's like, if you told me that on paper, like, yeah, sure, that seems fun. But unfortunately, part of the chorus with a lot of these Netflix exclusives, they seem to sap a lot of the style or like the heart of it, and just they become kind of cold and clinical by unfortunately by design, basically, because they seem to kind of follow like a derivative sort of metric for how these things are supposed to play out. And it seems like they're so focused on how things should be looking and how they should be like cool and so on that it becomes a weirdly sort of humorless dull experience, even though on paper this should be a slam dunk.
Yeah, it's like they're taking fun ideas and doing them in the most generic way possible. But I am going to stick up for Afterlife of the Party, one of the recent Netflix original movies that actually was really worth checking out. So I'm going to plug that. I'm going to hype that one up a second week in a row. But yeah, in general, Netflix movies, especially the action ones. I mean, when was the last time a Netflix action movie was like, take it home to your parents and introduce them? Like, I'm struggling to think of a single one.
I can't think of a single one. And I wanted to, piggyback off that of just saying not just that it's a Netflix original, but specifically these action ones. Even when you have, I mean, this is just personal opinion, even when you have a filmmaker like who is good and, is very capable, like I think of like Gina Price Bythewood with the Old Guard, which is a movie that I really had the opposite reaction to than a lot of our peers. I was like, this is kind of quite terribly choreographed and made.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I really disliked that movie.
Yeah,
and
it's not good.
And I didn't like Extraction either. Sweet Girl, you mentioned, I watched last week or 2 weeks ago, and I was like, oh my God. So I guess what I don't understand with these...
Can we mention Gunpowder Milkshake, which I almost forgot happened. But yeah, Gunpowder Milkshake.
Yeah,
I was embarrassing.
I was gonna bring that up later because it's kind of hard not to compare these two films. There's also there's like an Amazon movie I think called Jolt with Kate Beckinsale. I didn't see it, but also had kind of a similar kind of premise and I guess similar issues based on the reviews for that. But
yeah,
and similar poster.
Yeah, that's true.
Sorry for cutting you off there, Ryan.
No, you're good. I'm glad you brought that up. And I actually haven't seen Jolt or Gunpowder Milkshake, so I have no comparison there. Mainly because really until you guys, so graciously asked me to be on the show, which again, thank you. But I had no desire to see this movie until being asked to be on this show, just because I've stopped watching these Netflix action movies because they're just so, and I think the frustrating thing is, in theory, I like that they're still kind of making these mid-budget like action programmers that studios have seemingly all but abandoned. Like unless it's Keanu Reeves or Denzel Washington or Jason Statham, like these don't usually come out in theaters. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate that they're like seeking and making it a starring vehicle for people who maybe wouldn't have gotten that chance theatrically. And before I just sound like I'm so down on this movie, I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead is a very capable actress, and I definitely think she holds her own in this movie. I just wish she got a better vehicle to frame it. But when you're not in a theater, like, and you're going SVOD, like these Netflix action movies, it's like you're now basically in the ballpark of like other, sort of like SVOD action movies that end up on iTunes, like your Frank Grillo movies or your Scott Adkins movies. And they're much better. Like, those movies are so much better than these Netflix ones that people wouldn't blink or give the time of day to, because like, oh, it went to VOD. But it's like, going to Netflix is basically the same thing. But because it's Netflix and they have those marketing dollars, it's going to get more eyeballs on it. So I just, sorry for the rant, you guys. I was very frustrated by this movie, as you can tell.
I like the rants. Keep them coming.
Yeah, they really are sort of committing to like, hey, we're, it's like a red box approach almost. It's just sort of like, they'll watch any old thing, but I mean, it does damage over time. However, we should probably be more specific. I think that this is more so American, like North American geared action movies on Netflix.
Yes.
So your Spencer Confidentials and, I stick up for Old Guard, but I will concede that the action is not, anywhere close to being the stuff about that movie that I like. But they do have some action movies, some originals that are fantastic. They're just not American. I mean, I was just talking about on the show not too long ago, Rurouni Kenshin, the live action Rurouni Kenshin movies that they put on Netflix, incredibly good action. Some of the best action of the year. They're fantastic. But, that's a totally different scale. So there is a Netflix action movie I can think of, but American-wise, certainly not. So that's kind of the deal with Kate here. And I'm upset. I mean, I really like Mary Elizabeth Winstead. I mean, when I saw Woody Harrelson, I was like, I like Woody Harrelson too, but I was just kind of like, oh no, I know what you're going to do here. I know what you're going to do, and you're just going to do it. And then they're like, yeah, we're going to do it like 2 hours later. And I'm like, you're not even going to try to subvert anything. You're not going to like put in like a twist that somebody might be surprised by. Like, just all this stuff happens in the most sort of predictable fashion. And there is one thing about Kate that I thought rang way truer than Gunpowder Milkshake. Gunpowder Milkshake sort of has this like aesthetic of like female friendship being the heart of the movie, which is a great idea because, female friendship is a powerful thing. It's a wonderful thing to see on screen. The way Gunpowder Milkshake did it rings super false to me. I mean, it just rings so like a glorification of like violence being shared by women that just sort of was like, like read the room a little bit. With Kate, it's a little bit better than that. It's a little bit more defensible, kind of like where it lands on some of its like worldview and some of its moralizing. But at the same time, it still is sort of like violence is terrible. Enjoy, like, you know what I mean? It's just sort of like it's reveling and fetishizing action and revenge and violence, but like dressing it up with, surface level liberal values that don't really connect. And it's just sort of like, I know what you're doing. It's just so pandering and it's annoying. But there are elements of that stuff there that can resonate for some viewers, I expect. So I struggled with this movie quite a bit because how many movies did we get just this year that are challenging the revenge trope, right? Like movies like Riders of Justice, even, like the Nobody one with Bob Odenkirk to an extent. Ever since You Were Never Really Here, I just think that really smart filmmakers have been looking and analyzing these issues and doing a great job at it. So let's more of that, please.
Yes.
Not this.
Or Nicolas Cage's Pig, for example, would be another one.
Oh, that's the other one I was forgetting.
Yes, absolutely.
Pig.
Yeah.
Yeah, because in that movie, it just sort of is like, hey, it makes you think you're getting a John Wick thing. You're like Nicolas Cage is going to go full ham, pun intended and not intended at the same time. But then it's like, no, you're getting a meditative, deconstruction of why we think that aggression and hostility toward others gets us what we want. And then Kate comes out and it's sort of just like a 2012, red box movie that, is just sort of like, why is this here? Why is this being made when we could be, raising the bar a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest issue, as I mentioned before, is this that like it's so glossy in its presentation that the superficiality becomes more apparent, especially with the fairly derivative storyline. But even more than that, I just feel like the movie doesn't seem to be having fun with itself or its premise. It just seems like it's so weirdly dour and moody throughout the film that like the action's fine, but you know, you have to slog through, like, even though like we mentioned Mary Elizabeth Winstead's giving, you know, a dependable good performance, I'd like to see another action movie from her with better material. But it just doesn't seem like anyone involved is really enjoying this or playing it up. And I think one thing that the John Wick imitators tend to forget is that they're very heavily influenced by Buster Keaton and like silent comedies. And I think that's what I appreciate about Nobody, is that it at least seemed to be self-aware of that and kind of play up the like goofiness of the premise while also having some fun over the top action scenes. And this is like, yeah, the action scenes, I guess I would call them like competent. Like you can see what's going on. They're not unamusing, I guess, but they just don't really have a lot of flavor or unique style to it. And outside of just like having it be in Japan, which is just going to be visually interesting by itself, it just doesn't really have a lot going for it in the visual department, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I feel like it also utilizes what's becoming, I guess it can be used well, but is becoming frustrating in some of these like John Wick imitators, is like the just onslaught of shallow depth of field in these movies that I feel like are almost deliberately hiding the cheapness. Like they're in like a back alley somewhere in Japan, and it's like there's no reason this whole thing can't be in focus, right? It's like you're just kind of obscuring how kind of small and cheap your production is. And I had no idea, you brought this up at the start, I had no idea that David Leitch produced this. And I gotta say, I mean, he's, even as a director, has come out to be the more disappointing filmmaker from the John Wick duo. Like, I really haven't been in the bag for anything he's done, whether it be Atomic Blonde, Deadpool 2, especially not Hobbs and Shaw. Like, it's become really, really disappointing. In even in an action realm, it's like, yeah, they're competent, I think, as Will mentioned. But yeah, this has like even less stylistic flair than those movies I just mentioned, and very, you know, they're competent. You can see what's happening. The movie at least has the decency to kind of move at a clip. I know you guys already brought up Sweet Girl, which that movie was like molasses watching it. This at least like kind of moved. Did, you know, meat and potatoes, doesn't subvert anything, goes exactly where you expect it to go. But it was just, yeah, it was pretty unfun, pretty dour, as Will already mentioned. And I don't really, yeah, I just kind of about the halfway point or maybe 2/3 of the way, I'm just, what are we doing here? What am I doing here? Why is this happening?
I will say that I am kind of, you know, like cautiously anticipating David Leitch's next directorial film, Bullet Train, which is the one he's doing with Brad Pitt through Sony. And I mean, sure, it's like more assassins because the dude has he's got no other bullets in the holster. But yeah, I know some people were kind of chattering about how Kate was, some people had like issue with how it's just sort of like, I don't want to watch this like white woman murdering tons of Asian people for like 106 minutes. So I definitely understand that there's a lot of that in this movie. It's just kind of that's what happens when, you know, you kind of do this sort of like travel by way of action movie kind of thing. I did have one bad joke to make. Well, a lot, but just one I'm choosing to make right now. This movie, when I was watching it, I should have made this. I did a version of this for my Letterboxd review, but John Wick and Kate plus 8 other movies you'd rather be watching. Yeah, good. Okay, no.
I give it a B-.
Hey, I'll take that. That's
very generous of you, Ryan. Yeah. Also, I mean, we haven't really touched on like just the tired trope of female assassins get a kid under their watch. We saw that with Gunpowder Milkshake as well, and it just feels like, I don't know, I just find that kind of dismissive at this point.
On Netflix.
Like, right, yeah. I just feel like it just kind of like, it just feels like tired and sort of like dismissive that like we can't just have like a woman assassin movie where she has to like kind of deal with her own issues. She has to have like issues with like maternal struggles or something. Just seems like we've been there, done that, and this movie doesn't have anything, you know, thematically compelling to deal with that material. That just feels like another kind of cheap way to like humanize this assassin character in a way that, I don't know. I once that the child element came into play, that's why I think I fully started to like check out this thing.
Yeah, same here. Are we ready for our game, or did you have any other last thoughts, Ryan?
Yeah, I guess my only other thought is I would say these sort of lackluster action sequences, we to take the gas off of Netflix just a bit. I mean, I think this is happening at the big studio level. And I too, where I'm just like, I've thought of that a lot this year, where it's like there's been, kind of martial arts or like fluid take action movie inspiration in some big movies like Mortal Kombat or Snake Eyes or even Shang-Chi. And I'm just like, why don't you get like a Gareth Evans who did The Raid? Like, why don't you get somebody to do these movies instead of handing them to like, I'm not really familiar with this filmmaker. It looks like he was like a visual effects artist largely. He's only directed like this and Huntsman's Winter War or something like that.
Yes,
like
the Snow White and the Huntsman sequel without Snow White.
That's right. Yeah, which I never saw. But like,
it's very bad.
That's what I could gather. And it's just like, why are you giving these, or like, something like Snake Eyes with Robert Schwentke? I'm like, why aren't you giving this to like the guys who made The Raid or people who actually have an eye for this kind of material? And so I think the again, to go back, it's competent enough, this movie, but it's just like, just get someone who can do these sequences and make them pop. Because at the very least, even if your moral muddying is, or your morality is not great and it's muddied, or whatever the case may be, or it's not the most original plot, you can get away with that if you have like 3 slam bang sequences, and this one they just all kind of feel like the same sequence. So I just get better action filmmakers. That would be my one plea, both for Netflix and like big tentpole movies. Just get better action directors.
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like this one, because of the Yakuza storyline, and they have like a little nod to Beat Takashi at the beginning. Like, I'm assuming that's like they're kind of trying to go for like that blunt, like sharp violence of his films, which is kind of cool for like that one scene where she's like beating up and like killing all those guys in like the restaurant or whatever. But outside of that, it just like you said, grows repetitive and kind of dull because it doesn't have any tricks up its sleeve, and it just kind of does the same thing over and over and over again to ad nauseum, unfortunately.
Yeah, agreed. Well, that's Kate. Don't have much else to add for me here, but I am curious if you guys are gonna get this one right. And I don't know though if Ryan already spotted the Rotten Tomatoes for this, but let's see.
Oh, actually, I got I actually know the score, so you can start with Ryan on this.
At least he's honest. Ryan Oliver, let's see if you can beat Will Ashton, who's suspiciously going to be right on.
Oh, man. And I have not looked at the score because, as I mentioned, I was very unfamiliar with this movie prior to hopping on mic. So I'm going to guess, oh boy, I'm going to say 44%.
44 for Ryan. Will Ashton, so you saw it already, close. But hey, it could have changed. It could have changed, though.
I mean, last I saw, Ryan is very, very close. It's 43%.
Yeah, which I'm a little suspicious, Ryan Oliver. I don't know.
Well, I looked at saw something on the Wikipedia, and I happened to see the score there. That's in my defense. That's how I found out. Right on. I don't know the audience score, so we can guess this one.
Here we go. Okay, Will Ashton, what do you think the audience score is?
I'm gonna say Shot in the Dark, 64%.
64 for Will. What do you think, Ryan?
I'm going to say 72.
Oh, Will wins that round. It's 61%.
Oh, wow. Just barely with the standing popcorn icon.
Just barely. Yeah. It's the only thing left standing after this movie in some ways. But no cinema scores since it's Netflix. So we didn't get to do any cinema scores this week.
Again, I'm sorry. I've done goofed.
No worries. Yeah, it's out on Netflix. I mean, it's disappointing, but who knows what the future holds for Netflix films in general. I mean, we're getting into that period of time where we're going to get more of them at a probably better quality more consistently, but since it is award season. For next week, there's not a ton coming out that's on my radar. I'm interested in seeing Blue Bayou with Alicia Vikander.
Yeah.
It looks interesting, but the early reviews are not super strong. Not that there are a lot already, but
I love the look of it. I mean, it looks cool. Like from the trailer I've seen, it's like shot on, I think, like 16 millimeter. And it has like kind of like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I was just going to say it was directed and written by Justin Chon. So one thing I wanted to point out.
But there's also, I think, Cry Macho coming out this upcoming weekend.
The new Clint Eastwood film. Yeah, he has a new. I honestly am surprised like that it's coming out with so little fanfare, but I haven't seen any marketing for it. But yeah, Cry Macho.
Yeah, I'm kind of concerned about that, but also considering that they didn't really market Malignant, I'm kind of just wondering if because this day-to-date thing for Warner Bros. Was such a big failure, if they're just trying to save on marketing at this point and, you know, not really promote their movies as much as they used to because they know that all these movies are going to HBO Max and they might be losing and hemorrhaging more money as the rest of the year goes on. But that's just my guess. I have no inside knowledge of that.
No, I think you might be on the money there because I feel like the movies, like, I mean, most of their movies have suffered, I guess, let's be real. But like the ones that have like really, really suffered, did not generate interest are like the quote unquote, like adult movies, you know, like Those Who Wish Me Dead, In the Heights, and like Cry Macho really, really fits into that realm. And just also having worked in movie theaters, like, you know, for a decade or a little less than a decade in the late 2000s to mid 2010s. Clint Eastwood movies do exceptionally well theatrically, but amongst a much older audience who I feel like is probably neither super inclined to go into a movie theater at this moment, nor do they have HBO Max. So I feel like they're a little bit like, what do I do with this movie? So,
well, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Richard Jewell underperformed at the box office, right?
Richard Jewell did underperform for sure. Yeah. But I guess specifically movies starring Clint, because Clint has had more farewell tours as an actor than Kiss has at this point. Like, seemed to do well. Like Gran Torino did insanely well at the theater I worked at. When I saw The Mule, it did really well. So and it being a Western and him returning to the genre that made him an icon, you would think it'd be a much bigger deal, but I don't know. We'll just have to see.
It could be, you know, because critics haven't are still borrowed on it. So I have a feeling there is a reason for that. I think that it's because a lot of it too is like not necessarily the quality of his films, but the subject matter. The guy is sort of just, you know, his approach to films in general and stories in general is a bit of a relic of the past. I did want to mention, so Cop Shop is another one I'm kind of curious about, just because the reviews have been pretty decent so far. Cop Shop.
Cop Shop.
That's the new Gerard Butler, Frank Grillo film that's opening wide next week. It could be good. And then everybody's talking about Jamie, the adaptation of the Broadway play, another play kind of musical that's hitting Amazon. Amazon's on a roll this month. I mean, that's 3 weeks in a row they're coming out with something kind of, you know, worth talking about.
Is everybody going to be talking about, everybody's talking about Jamie next week?
We don't know. I mean, I've heard the play is fantastic and I'm hearing good things about the movie. I haven't heard amazing things, but we'll see.
I have to say, when I saw the trailer for Cop Shop, not to go back, I played one of my favorite games for those type of action movie, which is, okay, David Ayer or Joe Carnahan? Like, it's like
I don't think I see David Ayer in the. I've only seen the poster. But I kind of see what you're saying there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think I don't know. I find David Ayer, I guess, more aggressive, and then Joe Carnahan, I just find kind of like tiresome because it's just like he just kind of does like his jokes and stuff like that, and then David Ayer is just like being aggressively violent and bleak.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I mean, I wouldn't
His
disagree.
sense of humor is weird.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with the assessment. They both just have that sort of like aggressively macho swagger that I find to be really irksome. But also watching Gerard Butler and Frank Grillo team up, I'm like, okay, I'm on board. I am on board no matter who directed this. So
yeah, there are only 2 other movies that have been kind of hanging around the past week that we could get to next week. And, you know, just let us know if you have a preference, listeners. But there's Come From Away, which I think hit Apple TV Plus this week. And that's like a stage production movie. It's the Broadway musical. I don't know too much about it. Never seen it, but that's on Apple TV. And then the other thing was Card Counter, which we wanted to talk about this week. It has good reviews. I think it's pretty high up there, Rotten Tomatoes wise. And that's the new Oscar Isaac film. It's directed by Paul Schrader, so his big follow-up to First Reformed. And I've heard, like, from critics I trust, that despite some of these really positive reviews, it's not fantastic. We haven't had a chance to see it yet, though. Wasn't able to go to a screening. TIFF is keeping us pretty busy. But, hey, we might be able to talk about it next week because I think, we're into it. We want to see what Paul Schrader is up to. So, but that could be next week. We'll have to wait and see, for sure. But that'll do it for us this week. Ryan, thanks again for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I guess I could just plug my podcast that I've been doing, my pivot, as John pointed out at the beginning. I host a podcast with my friend Chris Thomas called The Good, the Bad, and the What, where each week we dissect, we look at a category. It could be a filmography, it could be a subgenre, whatever the case may be, and we pick a good film, a bad film, and a what or other film in the category, and we hash it out. And you can follow that podcast on pretty much any podcatcher of your choice, and you can follow us on all socials at The Good, Bad, What.
But Ryan, what if I want to go to a website
Oh,
for The Good, the Bad, the What?
yeah.
How do I find that?
We have a website. It's called The Good, Bad, What.
You do?
Yeah, we do. It's called The Good.
What's it called?
It is called. What is my site called?
Sorry.
It's called thegoodbadwhat.com. So just like the socials, thegoodbadwhat.com.
Wow, I'm going to check it out right away. I got your back, Ryan.
I appreciate it, John.
All right. Thanks again for coming on. And and then we'll also link your Twitter, of course, in the show notes of this episode. But that's it for us this week. Signing off from the Internet California, I'm John Negroni.
From the Internet Pennsylvania, I'm Washington.
From Seattle area, Ryan Oliver.
See you next time.